In this video, I'm going through a full season of playthrough of WWE 2K22's GM mode on the hardest AI difficulty setting. But not only that, I gave myself an incredibly difficult additional restriction. I must have at least $1 million in my balance at all times. This means I was extremely limited to only spending around 2/3 of the money that my opponent could spend, and it meant my decision making would need to be absolutely perfect. I go through my GM selection, my brand, my draft, shows, logistics, promises, and a whole load more. Hopefully you can learn a lot of things just by seeing the decisions I make in the moment, and the increased difficulty here forces me to try and make even better decisions, and you'll get to see them, of course. How do you think I'll get on here? All I really wanted to do was put up a good fight. If I got absolutely thrashed, then I'd be a little bit embarrassed, but as long as I kept it close, then I think that would be okay. This should be a fun one. Let's get stuck in, and if you are a fan of this idea and this style of content, take 2 seconds to click the like button. Thank you very much. Okay, so coming into this, I had already done a little bit of thinking. I knew kind of how I was going to approach things, but the first decision I needed to actually make was for my GM. Was I going to pick William Regal or my custom superstar? The reason for these two being my standout picks was that William would allow me to sign a legend for free, which would be very useful in a challenge that revolves around budget. Obviously, if I got a legend for free, I could put a little bit more money into that starting draft, get the legend for free, and my roster should be a little bit better overall. Or I could go with my custom superstar, which would allow me to boost the popularity of the least popular wrestler on my roster by 20. So that would be helpful too, but eventually I decided to go with William Regal. For my brand, I knew that I was going to be going with SmackDown. SmackDown's card allows you to boost the popularity of 6 random wrestlers on your roster by 6. This is obviously useful in a challenge where the average popularity of my roster is going to be lower than my opponent's, so getting to boost some of them up would be useful. I did want to give myself a little bit of a chance with this, so I purposely matched myself up against the opponent that I thought would be easiest to beat. So if you saw my video the other day talking about the best GMs, I said that Sonya was pretty much the only objectively bad GM in my opinion, so I was obviously going to match myself up against her, and the brand that I chose for her to have was NXT UK. I'm already giving up a lot of money in this. An extra $36,000 isn't that big of a deal. I didn't want her to be Raw and end up vetoing 3 of my wrestlers because that would be very awkward, as I'm going to have a small roster anyway, and I didn't want her getting a boost on her title fights. I decided to make this a 25-week season because honestly a 50-week season would be too easy. I knew that I would just definitely win this in a 50-week season because money just isn't a factor near the end of the season at all. And a 15-week season, I thought that was just a little bit too short to make for a real challenge. 25-week just seemed like a nice middle ground, so that's what I went with. For my draft, I had to work out how much I could spend per wrestler. I had a budget of $1.75 million. Remember, I've got to keep $1 million in the bank. And I wanted to keep $80,000 back for a free agent and maybe a power card if needed. So this left me with $1.67 million to spend. I decided to draft 10 wrestlers with this amount, meaning I'd only have $167,000 on average to spend per wrestler. The reason I was going with 10 is because I could get 10, I could spend $167k on each one, and then I could sign a legend for free and hopefully get a cheap free agent, meaning my overall roster size was 12. The first thing I had to do was look at who my big money wrestler was going to be. I prioritized stamina for this massively, as I knew that I'd need to keep my wrestlers in good shape, and I'd want them fighting lots of times early on without much rest so that I could build their popularity up. From my draft, it was clear that the male fighters were in much better shape than the female fighters, especially at the top end of the draft, so that's where I would be prioritizing things. So what I did with the draft is I went through, once I'd identified that men is where I'd be prioritizing things, especially for my earlier picks, I wanted to make sure I could get multiple bruisers and fighters, or cruisers and giants, but I was prioritizing bruisers and fighters at this stage within the same roles. So I wanted to make sure I could get 2 to 3 red or heel fighters and 2 to 3 green or babyface bruisers, and I'm just going to call them red and green because it's just so much easier. I know it annoys people, I'm sorry, that's just what I'm going to do. Making sure I could get like 2 or 3 green bruisers and 2 or 3 red fighters would just be extremely useful because it would allow me to build rivalries from the start, but also have future rivalries lined up too without needing to use role changes. This is very good because role changes are inefficient, and if you use them, you're kind of wasting a slot that you could be doing something better with. My most expensive draft signing ended up being Samoa Joe, who had 87 stamina, 58 popularity, and 4 out of 5 promo skill. At roughly 208,000, he was quite a lot over the cost I could spend on average, but he wasn't so expensive that I couldn't find a cheaper wrestler to balance it out. Samoa Joe was a green fighter, and I'd already seen 2 cheaper red bruisers that would be perfect to draft on top of him, and I knew that my opponent would never be drafting these guys near the top of their draft. Happy Corbin with 81 stamina and 54 popularity, and Jinder Mahal with 88 stamina and just 48 popularity. At the cheaper end of the green bruisers, they had low stamina, which meant I really needed to go with Samoa Joe and Happy Corbin as my sort of main matchup that I had planned to start with. I'd also seen that there was Xavier Woods and Tyler Breeze as green fighters, as well as Samoa Joe. They had decent stamina that I could then pair up with Jinder Mahal, and I ended up going for the cheaper option in Tyler Breeze. This gave me 2 perfect matchups to start the season with, 2 red bruisers and 2 green fighters. I then decided to go for my first female options. I would usually make these my first or second matchups, but as I'd already seen that the females with high stamina were in short supply in this draft, I'd prioritised the male wrestlers. Dakota Kai with 88 stamina and Mandy Rose with 76 stamina became my next perfect matchup of green fighters against red bruisers, and obviously their popularity wasn't too low either. Next, I knew I needed to add a giant and a cruiser combination to my roster to give my cards a little bit of variety. Now, I don't sign specialists because I want to max out the class synergies in every single fight if possible, and we'll see if this strategy works later on in this video. I ended up drafting the green cruiser Jordan Devlin with 83 stamina and 53 popularity, and then the red giant T-Bar with 72 stamina and 54 popularity. Next, I went to the females and tried to do the same thing. I drafted Tamina with 71 stamina and 51 popularity as my female giant, and I paired her up with Liv Morgan with 68 stamina and 52 popularity. This wasn't ideal on the stamina front, but my female options in this draft were so limited. What I do as I'm going through my draft is I write down a list of my roster. So I split it up by category, so I've got my green bruisers, my red fighters within male and female, etc. And this means that when I go into the season and I start trying to sign legends and free agents, I try to make sure that they already fall into the same categories to help build those future rivalries. My AI opponent drafted 15 wrestlers versus my 10, so this was going to be really hard to compete with their diversity and their strength in depth, in my opinion. At the start of the season, I chose Samoa Joe as my main title holder. I always look to pick one of the wrestlers that has a current rivalry planned out and has a future rivalry option too. So I'm not going to pick my giant or my cruiser, for example, because they don't have future rivalries because I only have one pairing. My female title holder didn't matter too much, so I prioritized stamina to ensure they could have a few early fights and build their popularity. Remember, to build popularity, they must appear in your show, but this costs stamina. I obviously told Triple H that I was born for this, and then I immediately applied my Legend Whisperer card and looked at which free agent I could sign. As it was a free legend, I knew I wanted a 10-week contract because it was free. Why would I get a 5-week contract? And my options in the 10-week legends were extremely limited. So limited, in fact, that I had to do exactly what I didn't want to do. I had to sign someone with the wrong role and then line up an immediate role change promo for them, which would cost me a crucial $10,000 and use up one of my promo slots that could really have been used for something more beneficial. I wanted to sign a free agent too, but as they wouldn't be able to fight anyone this week, obviously because I would have to use the role change on Ultimate Warrior, I decided to delay that signing by a week to try to keep my money situation under control. My strategy coming into these early cards, and maybe even throughout the season, was to prioritize normal match types rather than tables, TLC, or Hell in a Cell. This was to save both money and stamina, so the better the match type is, the more stamina it uses. I always recommend checking your commissioner goal to see if it has a worthwhile prize to complete, and always check the power card section too. In my power card section, I immediately saw a special promotion card, which are incredibly overpowered later in the season. At $75,000, this would eat up most of my budget, but I knew it was too valuable to not snap up. So I bought it now and held on to it for later in the season at a point when the fan retention rate drops down to 0.95 because that's the best time to use them. I applied my Birth of Legends cards to give my random wrestlers a popularity boost. It's best to use this right at the start, in my opinion, when you are choosing SmackDown. My first show card ended up having Samoa Joe versus Jinder Mahal as a title fight as the main event. Title matches help with ratings but tire your fighters out more, so I had to bear this in mind. I really just wanted to do what I could to keep the pace with my opponent early on. I thought that if I could keep up early, I might be able to manage my finances well enough to catch up and win later on, even if I did drop behind in the first few weeks. I also put T-Bar v Jordan Devlin as the opening fight, a perfect synergy fight between a 50 and 69 popularity wrestlers. I really didn't know which would be more popular out of the opener and the mid-card here. Fortunately, I got this right, as the opener was 2.5 stars, the mid-card was 2 stars, and the main event was 2.5 stars. These ratings are nothing to shout home about, but let's remember the important thing here. My roster was cheap, has low popularity. I only put on normal matches as I needed to focus on profitability, which I do recommend doing anyway in the early stages, and all I really wanted to do was try to keep pace with my opponent while slowly building the popularity of my roster. The one advantage I have with a smaller roster is it's easier to build and maintain that popularity because the same wrestlers would appear in cards more often, and popularity makes a huge difference to the quality of fights if you have synergies in play too. My opponent immediately messed up the ordering of their show, with their main event performing worse than the mid-card, meaning the fan expectation for their drama curve wouldn't be perfect on their end. Their mid-card outperformed me by 0.5 stars, my main event outperformed them by 0.5 stars, but my drama curve was better, so I thought I'd done enough to take an early lead in the season, and I was correct. Week 1, I gained 78,000 fans and moved 6,000 fans into the lead. T-Bar immediately demanded a rematch against Devlin. This was perfect because I like to try to stick to promises as much as I can, and when they request a fight with the person you're already planning a rivalry for, well, that's just spot on because you're easily going to meet their promise every single time. For the second week show, I had a plan to build up the popularity of my least popular wrestlers. I signed the new free agent I was after. It was Adrian Book, a 39 popularity green fighter. He was really low rated, but he was cheap, and that's exactly what I needed. I put on a tag team match involving Adrian on one side and Corbin on the other, one of my lower popularity fighters from the draft, and then I paired them with wrestlers on their teams that would deliver on the synergy increases, but were also higher popularity. So Tyler Breeze and my legend signing Ultimate Warrior. I put T-Bar versus Jordan Devlin as the opener to deliver on that promise, held my tag team match as the mid-card, and then I had a female title fight as the main event. I paid for the upgraded arena, the concert hall, and you should know that for the entire season, I made sure to put the show on in the biggest arena possible every single time, even if I didn't hit bonuses. I chose to go with the upgraded special effects, and I bought the upgraded advertising too to gain more fans, but I chose not to upgrade the crew until next week. My budget only had $58,000 remaining, and I didn't want to push things too close. The arena and the advertising options are the most important logistics because the arena brings in profits and helps you build your popularity on your card's wrestlers, and the advertising helps bring in additional guaranteed fans and also helps with popularity as well. The crew and special effects only help you boost morale and your show performance bonuses, which aren't quite as powerful, though getting them if you can still helps, of course. I actually messed up the ordering of the show this week. The Devlin v T-Bar rivalry didn't perform as well as I thought, and the tag team outperformed my expectations too, with 2.5 stars and 3 stars accordingly. The main event did well, and despite not nailing the drama curve, I gained around 1,000 more fans compared to my opponent, a small expansion of my lead. The signing of my free agent went down well, and this landed me a To The Moon card, giving me the ability to boost the popularity of a low popularity fighter by 15. So for $10,000 to sign Adrian Book, it seems it was already a worthy pickup. I chose to use this card on Corbin so that I'd get another 70-ish rated fighter on my roster from it, and T-Bar was also happy with the promise I delivered on. In week 3, my fights were already getting a little bit trickier to manage. As my mid-card, I had to throw a bad matchup in, a cruiser against a bruiser, though their roles were opposing at least. This was to meet my commissioner goal of scheduling a run-in. I had to make it a bad matchup because the run-in is what starts or continues a rivalry, so I did this to avoid the actual bad matchup getting a rivalry, so the person running in built the rivalry that way. I repeated the tag team match from last week as the first card, which did well. The mid card did about as well as I could have hoped for, 2 stars. And my main event of Samoa Joe versus Jinder Mahal, a rematch from week 1 but not a title fight this time, did okay. And it was actually a tables match for the first time, just because they had a little bit of stamina to play with. My opponent went for all 3 tables matches in this week, so you can see I'm already being outspent in money and in stamina, but I actually still managed to outperform them in the show and gain 9,000 more fans than they did. After 3 weeks, and with a $1 million budget deficit, I had a lead of 15,000 fans. I was already started to ask myself, could I actually do this? And yeah, it turned out I could. I know this isn't the full-length playthrough video that some of you wanted, but I did record for over 6 hours the full playthrough of this, and I ended up messing up the audio, so I've had to do it this way. And I could go ahead and craft this whole amazing story video here, but despite how much I enjoy playing GM mode, I can't quite get over how easy this is, and I don't think the video would be any more entertaining if I dragged this out for another hour or so. I ended up winning this season by a ridiculous margin of 240,000 fans, and I didn't even buy a single card to use on my opponent. I didn't veto any of their stars, and I didn't hit them with a double cost card unless it was free from my commissioner goal, which I got one of in the entire thing. It wasn't until week 9 that I ended up signing more wrestlers. I signed Kevin Nash and Kofi Kingston to become a new 1v1 rivalry and potentially use them in a new tag team rivalry. And it wasn't until week 16 that I signed extra females. I signed Kaylee Ray as a free agent, and I signed Beth Phoenix, the legend, and I had to use another role change to change her into a Red Bruiser to be a rival with Kaylee Ray. The biggest trick I used throughout was trying not to fight my level 4 rivalries at pay-per-view. And I also tried not to fight them too much outside of pay-per-view either. Occasionally I would as a one-off and they'd always deliver a banger fight, but you don't want the rivalry to get boring or stale. The trick of not fighting them at pay-per-view and not fighting them at level 4 outside of pay-per-view either works, because if you don't fight them, they go back down to level 3 after 2 or 3 weeks. Then you can fight them again, get a high-rated fight, and move them back up to level 4 rivalry and repeat again. The other big tip that I need to re-emphasize that I said earlier on was that the special promotion power cards are ridiculously OP. I managed to buy another 2 of these, and I saved the 3 I had in total to use in the final 3 to 4 weeks of the season. That is the reason that I had such a big lead over my opponent, but honestly, I've already done the maths on this. I already would have won if I didn't use a single one of these as well, and still by quite a comfortable margin of probably like 50,000 fans or something. I always made sure I was keeping an eye on the weeks that I'd unlock new arenas, and I made sure I had enough money in the bank the week before so that I'd be able to buy the new arena when it unlocked, because the profits from bigger arenas are so valuable. Coming up to WrestleMania, I tried to nurse my level 3 and level 4 rivalries through so that I had as many high-level rivalries to use up in the final week of the season as I could. The first fight I put on was a level 4 title fight between females and a Hell in a Cell, and it was 5 stars. Next up, there was a female TLC tag team match, level 4 rivalry, ended up being 4.5 stars. Then a male tag team. It was only a level 2 rivalry this time, but it ended up with another 4.5 star match, this time with Extreme Rules. I then finished with a level 4 male TLC match and a level 4 Hell in a Cell title match, which delivered 4.5 and 5 stars accordingly. I tried to keep the card as varied as possible, but the results from them were all extremely predictable, and I knew after seeing my results, and honestly I knew just when I was putting the card on, that there was absolutely no way my opponent would beat me. In the end, it was a landslide victory. I just absolutely smoked the hardest difficulty with a huge disadvantage I've shared as much as I can remember in this video with you. Mechanically, this game is very easy to abuse. I didn't sign any specialists in the entire thing. I only had 16 wrestlers on my roster at its absolute biggest, surviving with 12 for large portions of it. I never had an injury, I never even had a wrestler drop below 40 stamina because I managed it so closely, and I didn't apply any injury-related power cards, though I did make good use of health spar cards, which I love buying whenever possible. I hope you have still learnt something from this video, and I hope you have enjoyed it. Remember to check out the second channel in the link in the description below, and just subscribe. I would really appreciate that. Do let me know any thoughts you have in the comments down below, and hopefully I can see you again in another video. Thanks for watching.